When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Curran.
That's right, everybody. We are back. This is the HTML All the Things Podcast. This episode, what the 80-20 rule really means for web developers, or actually, we have a typo here, Mike. What the 80-20 rule means, roar web developers. Just like
wow. Yeah, I think we're on two different versions of the show notes, because in the background here, we're actually changing all of our apps at the same time. So we have Notion going for our new show notes database that's going to happen. We have Linear for our product management, and then we still have remnants, obviously, of the old Google Docs that we used to use for a while. And I think you're on the Google Docs version of it. And that's
I absolutely am.
Yeah, there we go.
So we're doing some productivity stuff just because I'm kind of sick of being like, hey, open up this app. Like, just to post the podcast, I got 18 tabs open. That's exaggerating, but it's still a lot. And so I was like, I'm going literally crazy. And so I kind of want to start using some of these productivity tools that have kind of risen to fame recently. And so I don't go crazy. So hopefully Notion and Linear help out with that. We'll see how that goes. But anyway, yeah. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about what the 80-20 rule really means. Mike's going to run us down apparently in his truck. Like, what's going on here? Anyway, he doesn't even have a truck. Mike's going to give us the rundown on what the 80-20 rule really means and what it means specifically for developers as well. He's going to talk about how to identify the 20% that matters, benefits for web developers, and all sorts of things like that. So, Mike, without me talking about typos and incorrect things left, right, and center, why don't you take it away?
You missed a whole part of the introduction. I'll do it.
I don't even know.
If that sounds interesting to you and you want to support the show, please leave a rating or a review on a podcast app. Check out our Patreon. Join us on our Discord server, or join us in our Discord server, or share this with your friends. Actually, sharing with your friends is probably the number one thing. It helps a ton. The other thing that Matt missed, crazily, is our affiliate link, which is scrimba.com. It's an entire education platform, like a huge education platform that now has a full stack course. You all know that I'm big on full stack. That's what I am. I'm a full stack developer. They have a full stack course. So if you want to become like me, you can go to scrimba.com/links/HTML things, sign up, buy their subscription. We get some money back for that. I think it's a 20% off if you do sign up with that link and become a web developer today. But with that being said, now we can go on and talk about...
I want to say one quick thing. We've just changed all our software, so I'm really scrambled. Literally, as I was doing the introduction, my watch started shaking because somebody tried to call me. My phone is upstairs charging because we're doing a deep clean of the home, and my chargers aren't plugged in back here. I'm in trouble. I am not in the right place. I'm at my computer, but it's the only thing that is familiar right now. It is I'm in the midst of chaos.
All I hear is excuses. No, I'm joking.
No, you are correct, but I'm still going to tell you. I'm going to tell you the excuses.
It's fair. I kind of like that you made that mistake, because I don't think you've made that mistake in maybe a couple of years. And I've always wanted to take over the introduction. I just didn't want to do it because you were doing it so well. So I got my wish. Probably the last time I'll ever do the introduction. It's all Matt from now on. But yeah, let's talk about what we're going to be talking about, right? We're going to talk about where the 80-20 rule came from. We're going to give you a little bit of a history lesson. We're going to talk about what it means specifically for web developers, right? How you can benefit from it, right? Like what you can do today to make it so that the 80-20 rule works for you. And at the end, what I want to talk about a little bit is how AI actually changes the rule a little bit. What AI does to make it the rule almost not make sense anymore, or just in general, how you can think about it differently. with that being said, let's jump right into what the 80-20 rule really means. So this term was coined by Vilfredo Pareto, and I am not an Italian, so I cannot speak Italian. That is an Italian name, and I have butchered it. I have butchered the Italian language, and I'm proud of my accomplishment at butchering the Italian language.
Oh my God.
But essentially, Vilfredo, it was an Italian engineer, somewhere in the realm of the late 1800s, early 1900s. He found a random stat and a random observation was that 20% of Italian landowners held 80% of the land, right? And it was an approximate stat. It wasn't exact, probably like 19.86 or something stupid like that. But that's the observation that he made. Then he went deeper into it and found that there was more of these kinds of 80-20 rules throughout his environment, right? And he formalized this power law distribution, the Pareto distribution, showing extreme concentration of value among a very small share of actors. So that's where this kind of extrapolation of the 80-20 rule came from. And when we talk 80-20, I want to clarify this as well. A lot of times we're not talking exact numbers. We're just talking that a large, like I think this was a good kind of definition, show extreme concentration of value, right? Like a very, very large amount of value is packed into a small number, right? So the 20% is usually just referring to a small number, 80% large number. And that's how we kind of throw it around all over the place. Sometimes the 80 means something more valuable. Sometimes the 20 means something more valuable. But that's the main general gist of the 80-20 rule when it's talked about, especially in our industry. So variants of this 80-20 rule, you can say one of them is like 20% of the work you do yields 80% of the user visible value, right? So the features you're writing, only 20% of them really are used by the users, the 80% of users. 20% of the bugs you trigger 20% of the defects triggered cause 80% of the incidents on your app. Okay. 20% of the app surface drives 80% of the traffic. So it's similar, like 20% of the app surface, as in like 20% of your app drives most of your traffic in your application. All the other parts of the app is just like auxiliary stuff that you thought was important, but maybe not important. And that's the kind of stuff we're going to talk about. Another thing, like another 80-20 that I like to use is the first 80% of an app takes pretty much the same amount of time as the last 20%, because the first 80%, you're kind of greenfield, you're building, you're going quickly. And as you get to the last 20% of building out an application, all these little intricacies start happening and it becomes harder and harder to build. And so you slow down. As you start getting it ready for production, it becomes harder and harder. And that last 20% takes up almost as much time as the first 80. So, Matt, do you have anything that you use personally the 80-20 rule for, or any observations that you can make like in your own work that you're doing right now that the 80-20 rule applies for?
Well, the first thing I'm thinking right off the hop, and I don't know whether it fits in the 80-20 rule, so maybe we can kind of analyze that, but we do have a client that is very, very, very particular and will kind of like die on every single hill based on absolutely no data, if that makes sense. And it's really freaking frustrating. Like, it's something where this particular client is very particular, and I respect that. I absolutely understand being particular when, your website is your baby. If it's a hobbyist website, especially, this person manages multiple sites, and they will die on the fact of like, we need to add a share button at the top or else we're going to look like fools. And I'm like, well, what? Wait, we have a share button that's like slightly below the top. Like, what do you mean? And the person will be like, no, it has to be at the top. So then I'll move it, exactly where they want it, right to the top. And then all of a sudden they'll see someone else, meaning like one of their competitors or just a site that they like, have the share button at the bottom. And I'll get a phone call and it'll be like, why isn't the share button at the bottom? If the share button isn't at the bottom, we're going to look like idiots. And now I'm only giving one example of a share button, but this happens with everything. Things being, center aligned, text being center aligned rather than right aligned. Little, borders being 2 pixels wide instead of like 3 pixels wide. And so like my argument with him is always, hey man, can you focus on the content and not focus on the border that's 2 or 3 pixels? And my thought, and what I do indeed advise, of which it is usually ignored, is that in general, you want to look professional, and that's what he's worried about. but no one is going to show up and be like, oh my God, this border is 3 pixels wide. It should be 2.5. These people are idiots. Really, they're going to look at your content. And if your content's really bad, then they're going to say, oh my God, these people are idiots. And I keep trying to drive that into this particular person, and it absolutely is not happening. Again, this might not work in this 80-20 rule, but I kind of feel like the content in this particular case fits in the 20, and the 80% of the other stuff means so little. Because I'll give another example. I threw together the HTML All the Things website. It's built in Webflow. There are many classes that I haven't even named. I put this thing together to get it done. And I'd like to do a rework and a redo at some point, but I know that we need to focus on the content. And so if I write a decent article, I will see in our analytics that article gets caught on by Google. People start viewing it, and it gets consistent viewership for a long time. Our top article right now has had consistent viewership and has been at the top of the heap, short of the odd thing of, like, let's say a certain episode of ours goes viral or something. But when it's business as usual, that article is at the top of our most viewed pages every single week for, I think it's been 3 to 6 months, somewhere in between there right now. And so it's proof that no one's showing up and being like, that's it. This person had classes, like automatically like generated classes on Webflow. I'm out of here. I know that some developers listening right now, especially people who use Webflow, are like, Matt, that's terrible. I understand that. It was literally to get it up and running as quickly as possible. And it works and has worked and is continuing to work. And so the 20% in this particular case is the content.
Yeah. And I think that shows the value of understanding the 80-20 rule, right? Like, if you understand that you need to find that 20% and focus on it, then you're going to instinctively figure out what that 80% is that you shouldn't be like too worried about. You know what I mean? Obviously, you can't make a project without the 100%. So that's another key thing about this, is like, you can't ignore the 80%. But if you know where to put more of your time, it's almost like you reverse the time fraction. You put 80% of your time into the 20% and 20% of your time into 80%, if that makes sense. And it's a little bit complicated, and it's not always that clean, or you know what? It's not ever that clean, because a lot of times that 80% is something that's required for that 20% to work. But the reality is that knowing where that is going to help you in different scenarios. And that's what I'm going to talk about right now, right? What the 80-20 rule really means for developers is figuring out those like 80% buckets and 20% buckets and how they work for you. For example, prioritization, right? You have a bunch of tasks on your to-do list, or you have a bunch of tasks in your sprint. What are the 20% of tasks that are going to have the biggest impact? If you can find that out, and I'm going to give some advice on how to find out, like how to find out those 20%. If you can find that out, I can guarantee you it's going to make you look like a better developer. It's going to make you a better developer because you're going to focus on the tasks that matter first, and then you're going to kill off the tasks that matter last. And then the ones that don't matter will fall to the end, and you might put them back into the backlog, stuff like that. But if you can know which one is the top 20% of how it's going to impact whatever you're building, that's going to help you, guaranteed.
You know, what's kind of interesting with the prioritization thing is it's kind of like one of the reasons why we decided to, start this Notion and start this Linear and things like that, is because like you and I've been talking, and one of the things we like to do when we market the podcast is actually to organically do so. So maybe you'll post, let's say it's the episode that comes on Tuesday, like the kind of the mainstay episode. Maybe I'll start advertising on Thursday, right? Sometimes you'll advertise on X on Friday. I'll schedule something on the Saturday. We like to do that because it's kind of organic, and you're not just getting hit with like, hey, everybody, our podcast episode's out on all platforms right on Tuesday, and then we disappear. We kind of like to spread it out. The issue is I miss doing certain episodes, and some episodes never get promoted on certain platforms because we don't have like that kind of focus and that prioritization. And so I feel like these apps that we're starting to use are like, hopefully, if these work out, or these processes is like a way for us to find that 20% that matters most. I know this isn't exactly development related, but the prioritization, I think, kind of stands here because it allows me to, kind of wake up, let's say this, because this is usually when I do my social media, whether I schedule it for later or not. And I'll wake up and I'm like, okay, kind of want to do a bit of podcast promotion. Instead of me racking my brain and going through my feeds and getting caught in a doom scroll and all this stuff, it's like the idea is I'll check my to-do list and be like, looks like episode 20 or whatever doesn't have a LinkedIn post, I'll do that. So it's just like a direct, like, boom, boom, let's just do it. And it cuts out all that other stuff. So it's prioritizing, but it's also like kind of forcing you to do it rather than get caught up in all that other stuff.
Yeah. And yeah, that's a really good point. That's something that we'll be talking about as well in the next segment, where like tracking, right? Tracking what you're doing is going to help you identify what that 20% is. Because if you're just doing everything ad hoc, it's kind of, you can get it, like you can get a general idea of what's priority or not. But the reality is that because you're doing everything ad hoc, you're really only focused on the thing you're doing at the moment. And so retrospectively, like looking back is very difficult. Now with these new systems that we're implementing, Linear, Notion, everything's going to kind of have a history. And what we can do in all of our meetings is look at that history and be like, what worked, what didn't, why didn't it work? And that's going to make it a lot easier for us to identify what we need to prioritize, essentially. Having said that, the next thing here for developers on the 80-20 is technical debt. This is where like knowing what the 80% actually what the 80% is might actually help you more. When you're writing code in a large code base and you're under a time crunch and you have a bunch of developers, the reality of the situation is that no matter how much you think you're going to be doing refactoring in the future, because I know a lot of us write code and they're like, I don't like how I'm doing this, I'll probably refactor it later. That is like a ism of a developer, right? Like developers say that in their own heads, in meetings all the freaking time, but the reality is always very different. And this is where like the 80% rule kind of applies, where 80% of the code that you write, even if it could be refactored, might not be worth refactoring. And so if you keep that in mind as you're writing code, and you know that you're probably not going to get around to refactoring this piece of code that you're writing right now, that might make you write it differently. That might make you accept the fate of that code being always a little bit janky and being okay with that. But just like that mindset switch might make you write better code in the end, right? And be okay with the fact that it's okay to have some areas of code that are just not going to be at the top quality of whatever your standards are. Next thing here is like time usage and productivity, similar to the prioritization one. If you can find the 20% that has the most impact on your day and put more time into that, right, you can become a more productive person, right? So if you can find that, hey, having a solid 3 hours of my work period unadulterated by notifications gives me 100% of my productivity. Like I get all my work done in those 3 hours. Let's say that's what you figure out. Then giving yourself more deep work time should be a higher priority, right? So finding that like thing that impacts your day the most to make you a better developer or make you a better worker should be a priority of yours. And part of that is, obviously identifying that there's going to be other stuff that you have to do that's going to be part of that 80%. But if you can, again, skew a little bit more to the 20, that's going to make you better.
I'd like to say something on that as well, where that 20% that has the most impact on your day is context sensitive. So there are times where I'm kind of overwhelmed personally by a lot of things to do. Many of the times that happens, it's very much just a few, not a few, but it's a list of small tasks, maybe 15 things. Each thing takes a maximum of 20 minutes, and it just seems overwhelming because you have this huge list. Finding like either a time a day or getting into a certain groove that allows me to finish tasks quickly is that 20% on of my most impact, right? That 20% of impact, I'll call it. So I want to find that 20% of impact, and it's like, okay, start at the beginning of the list and just like go as quickly as you can, find the stuff that's, low hanging fruit, and then you work your way there. And then that gets the ball rolling. And that's the time that I'm able to just sort of like shut everything off and do that is great. I wouldn't necessarily call that deep work in my particular case, because I'm jumping from task to task, going here, left, right, center, up, down, and I'm making a lot of notes. But if I'm able to find that time of day or find that work tempo, I guess you could say, frame of mind even, where I'm able to work quickly in that context, that's the best thing. But there are other times where there's just a big thing to do. Maybe there's emails to take care of, the daily grind, but then there's also like a big thing that's going to take 3-4 weeks, something like that. That's just sort of like almost like the big elephant in the room, if you will. And at that point, you want to be like, all right, I'm going to like sit here and I'm going to double down on this particular thing. Like I'm just going to I'm going to like shut off all of my devices. I'm going to get into my deep work because I know that my deep work, me not being interrupted, is going to allow me to rip into this task. The difference between those two things, because they kind of sound similar, is that one of them I specifically want to move quickly, and the other one I specifically don't want to move quickly. I specifically want to get into the grind and get stuck in it. So whether I'm working quickly on tasks within that big thing, or whether I'm really getting into the most complicated part of it and, you know, kind of getting in the right mindset, I'd consider those kind of two separate things. One of them is about checking the boxes. Another one is about getting stuck in it and getting myself thinking about it on my, I mean, even now in my off work time, so that I'm able to almost over the days of, let's say, a 3-week project like that, I'm able to almost snowball and go quicker and quicker and quicker and be more productive because I'm like stuck in it and I'm constantly thinking about it. And like then all my deep work is even more productive as I keep going on.
Yeah, that little snowball effect is really powerful, by the way. So, and one thing that I like to kind of do is when you're feeling unproductive, allowing yourself that ability to start small and start rolling the snowball is really key. Ideally, I kind of try to take on the biggest task first. That's when I'm feeling good, when I'm feeling like it's a good day, that's what I'm going to do. But it's not every day, and every day is kind of different. So like based on how I'm feeling that day, I do kind of go about and tackle things in a different way. So learning that about yourself, I think takes a lot of time and effort, because a lot of people will just be like, hey, this is the productivity framework that I'm using. I always tackle the big fish first. But that's not how humans are, right? Like that's essentially what you're saying too, Matt, is that like you need to find that thing about yourself that helps you adjust to any type of motivation or any type of day that you're having or any type of time that you have available to you.
Well, I can even give like a really brief specific example, and that is that sometimes I feel as though I'm not really being productive, even though I'm getting a lot of stuff done. And the way, instead of me not having a 20%, right? Like the whole day kind of feels unproductive. I kind of feel like crap at the end of the day. And I'm just like, okay, there was no 80-20 for me today because like everything just kind of felt like garbage. What I do to sort of like force myself to realize that, not even in the context of 80-20, but to force myself to like realize that I am being productive, is that I actually just take I have a OneNote and I just quickly jot down everything I do as I do it. And then at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, I did actually do, 5 things, 10 things, whatever. And I wasn't just kind of sitting around, because like your brain will just kind of throw that stuff out. It's like that email was actually like it all on paper. It's just like I sent an email to Mike, but maybe it was a huge report. And that report took forever. And so your brain's just gonna be like, yeah, but all you did was send an email. It's like, yeah, but like when I look at the logs here, it's like, no, there was a big thing. Right. And so like that helps me get into the groove of like, okay, I am actually being productive. And then that would, at least for me, that would help me with the 80-20. Because then I can go like, okay, I feel really productive. These are my logs to kind of like prove that I have been productive today. Now, when was I most productive? When you feel like crap the whole day, like at the end of the day, rather, it's just sort of like, I wasn't productive at all today. And then you kind of just throw the day away.
I kind of want a tool that manages that for me, like an AI that will follow you around your computer and log what your accomplishments are for the day. Now, I understand that there's like these like really invasive time tracking softwares that will like check if you're on your code editor and stuff like that. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something that could contextually be aware of what I'm doing, what my task list is currently like in my linear board, for instance, and then associate that with the actual actions that I'm taking. And then outside those actions, also add on to it. Like I want an over the shoulder, like time tracker and accomplishment tracker, right? Just so, because I've noticed that I've tried to do that before, like keep a list of the tasks, but I always get distracted to the point where like I'm switching between tasks a lot and I just forget to update it. And at the end of the day, it's just, it just becomes a list of random things that aren't really associated with my day.
Right.
I want something that can automate that for me. So hopefully, I think AI could do it. Now, having said that, huge privacy concerns there, because if an AI has access to everything that you're doing on the computer, not a great thing, but maybe there's a local model that could do it without having to like call home or call like an API or something like that. Like I feel like that would be a really cool use case of a local LLM.
Well, when you said that too, I actually had an idea of, have you ever seen those like little necklace things that are like an AI like microphone, and it listens to you things all day? So like if you're, I think one of the examples was like if your wife or girlfriend like tells you like, hey, go to the store and pick up like milk, eggs, and cheese, and you like show up to the grocery store and you're like, shoot, did I need to pick up cheese? I don't remember if she said that. You can kind of like go back in the notes of this, like, whatever it is, this like necklace thing, and check to see what your wife or girlfriend said. I mean, it's a cool idea, and it like could potentially be applied to what you're asking for, but you're 100% right with the privacy problem, where you're just like, someone comes up to you, goes like, yo man, my password's like 1234, can you like quickly do this for me? And it's like, oh great, now an AI knows that this guy's password is 1234. Fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a complex problem, but definitely I feel like it's going to be solved at some point. Okay, having said that, the last thing here on the 80-20, what 80-20 means for developers is burnout for me. And this goes back to, I think we've had episodes on this before, but essentially Google had this 80-20 rule as well, where they allowed their employees to use 20% of their time on projects outside of like their main scope, right? So the 80% of their work was on like whatever team they were on. Like if they were on, AI, they were just working on AI or whatever. Or if they were on docs, they were docs. But then they were allowed to have like a 20% scope. So maybe like a Friday, every Friday, they were allowed to work on a side project. Inside of the Google scope, like it has to be inside of Google, but a side project outside of their main thing. And what this allowed is new ideas to be created, but it also allowed developers and people to have that ability to context switch a little bit, to take a break from maybe the thing that kind of pissed them off during the week, to work on something completely new that's not in production, to give themselves an ability to just test out things that they never knew about. And that, from what I've seen inside of my own team and like the management that I'm doing, helps a ton for keeping people saner and like less burnout. Because people want to try new things. Sometimes they get into this like cycle of like, oh, I'm fixing a bug, I'm making a feature, I'm fixing a bug, I'm making a feature on the same exact application. And it just grinds them down a little bit, right? But if they have a little bit of their time back to either research something that they're interested in, or work on a project that is just outside of the scope of like a large enterprise level thing that they were working on before, it just allows them a little bit more freedom. It allows them to reset a little bit for the next part of the week. And then while they're working on their other projects, sometimes they're thinking about this one, and like then vice versa. And sometimes this works out great for the company too. Like for example, the Google example, Gmail was one of those 20% projects from someone. So someone spun up Gmail as one of their side projects at Google. All right, Google.
Is your Google talking right now?
My Google heard enough about me and has started to literally explaining what I'm explaining right now. Damn it, Gemini. Damn it.
Man, you know the first thing I did with Gemini was turn off the wake word.
Yeah, no, that's honestly a good idea. That's a ridiculous thing. I mean, it was doing an accurate job. Like it explained that, hey, this was a little bit more nuanced, but whatever. Anyway, so it was a side project that he had at Google that turned into a massive product that obviously most of the world uses at this point. So there is some benefit for a company. I think the biggest benefit for a company, though, is not losing developers to burnout and allowing developers to try things that they're actually interested in, right? A lot of times work is work. Nothing you can get around that. Sometimes your work you don't like, right? Like so certain parts of it you like, certain parts of it you don't. But when you are allowed the opportunity to choose what you want to do in that 20%, it's going to give you that kind of authority and that autonomy to you just put your brain into a different method and allow you to rest a little bit from the regular tasks.
Well, it kind of prevents almost like the factory work effect, where I mean I've worked in a factory, and especially if you're on the line, which is the assembly line, it's very much just like you don't feel as though you're accomplishing anything because there's always more and usually the same work coming down the line. So you just like show up and you're just like, do this now, do the same thing again, and the list goes on, and you just keep doing that until you go home, and then you show back up, and unless they rotate you do the same thing again and then again. And it's not like you show up and you're like, hey, I'm gonna go and something as simple as I'm gonna go and clean that area of the plant. You clean the area, and now it's like, hey, I've accomplished something. There's that payoff of like kind of stepping back and being like, whoa, this area looks really nice now. It's nice and organized. It's not dirty, not dusty. Cool. There isn't that when you're on that assembly line. And I feel like that can kind of happen with that ticket structure of like, do a ticket, hand it in, do a ticket, hand it in, do a ticket, same kind of idea, right?
That's exactly it. Now, the reality is that a lot of companies will say the 80-20 rule works, and then what ends up happening is you work 100% of your hours on your work, and then you work 20% overtime or 20% extra hours on this random side project. That's not the best implementation of it, obviously. That's something you might want to watch out for at a company, with being like, hey, we're forcing you to do this side project outside of your regular work hours. A little bit of a red flag, but that's the reality that I've seen, especially at startups, because startups just don't have that 20% flexibility that like a large corporation like Google or Amazon or Facebook has, where like they have 15 different redundant engineers for every position, so they're able to like float around a little bit. Now, having said that, I've given you a bunch of ideas about what 80-20 means. What I haven't given you is how to identify that 80-20 split in those different ideas, right? So that's what I want to talk about right now. Metrics is the first one that I want to bring up. Metrics are really important. Stuff like analytics, so adding analytics to your applications, that's going to give you an idea of what your users are using the most. And most of this like review of your analytics is going to come down to, hey, look, the user is using this form and not using anything else on the site. This is my 20%, right? Like you're going to very quickly see what users are using and what users aren't. And a lot of times it's not what you expect. And a lot of times it's not what you've put the most time into. And that's the reality. That's why I always say you need to get your application out there to actual users before you spend, days or months upon months deep diving into features that could be used. You need to make sure that people actually want them, right? So get it in some capacity out as fast as you can, get analytics on it, talk to your customers. That's another part of how to identify, is getting feedback for the product. Talk to your customers, take that information and find what that 20% really means. Like where you need to put that your 80% of effort, right? You find that 20%, you put 80% of your effort into there, and you use the other 20% on the other auxiliary stuff that needs to support the 80. Tracking, Matt mentioned this, right? Product management tools, task management apps, Linear, Notion, putting more of your information putting more of what you're doing in writing and with a history about it is going to make it easier for you to find out where you're wasting time, what's working, what's not working. You can come back to it like every month and just take a look at what you've done and how long stuff took, and have an idea of where most of your time is going. And then you can evaluate those tasks on an individual basis and be like, was this worth spending 3 weeks on? I spent 2 days on this thing. This actually moved the needle. I spent 3 weeks on this thing. This didn't do anything. Maybe I should try to reprioritize. So the only way you can do that is by tracking what you're doing. And Matt and I are starting to do that with HTML things. It's going to become more of a rigid process as it goes. But for now, like, you start small. Don't go crazy. Don't track everything in your life, but put some stuff on paper or put some stuff in a task management app.
You more or less want to get into the habit of doing it, because like having the actual like the app installed or having the app account made is not enough. You have to think of it where you're like, oh, I need to do that. I better add that to my task management app or my calendar. If you're not in the habit of doing it, and it's difficult to get into the habit, I will say that for some people, myself included. But if you're not in the habit, then you're not in the habit. And so if someone keeps like, trying to make plans with you or whatever, you're just going to constantly just say, like, oh yeah, I'll remember. And then everything gets all backed up and all messed up. And then you're going to be right back to where you were before without using something like a time tracker or whatever it is.
Yep, absolutely. The other thing you can do if you're working in a team of developers to find out what like the most critical parts of your code are or where the most problems are, talk to the developers around you. See where they're spending most of their time. You can even take a look at their PRs, for instance, and see if there's any patterns there that like, oh, this one developer or like three or four developers are spending 80% of their time in one file. Well, that file is probably really important. I better learn that file, right? Like that's probably the 20% file, right? That's the top priority file. So learning how to use the tools around you, learning how to use the people around you to find what's most important is going to make your visibility higher as well, right? Like if you're looking for career growth, working on the higher importance, higher visibility things, higher impact things, which in my opinion is that 20%, is going to make you more, promotable or you kept on the team longer. If you're always stuck working on the 80%, the low visibility stuff, when it comes to reviews and they're like, okay, well, who are we going to lay off or who are we going to promote? They're going to look at the people that are that have the most impact. And that's the 20% is where the impact is. Okay. And that's why I think it's super important to identify that as part of your routine and always try to strive to get to that 20%. And sometimes the 20% is also where the hardest work is in terms of like the most complex part of the app or whatever. And that's why a lot of developers will stay away from it. But that's where all the problems are. If you could put yourself in a position where you're the expert in that 20%, how are they going to fire you? Why wouldn't they promote you, right? At that point. Lastly, here is AI. I think if you want to look at like potential patterns in a code base or potential problems, potential areas of attention, sending a code base through an AI like Cursor and giving it like a prompt like analyze this code base, look for patterns, and find the 20%, like the top priority areas that need attention right now or that are most used or most referenced, that can have a significant impact. Like Cursor has gotten better and better at larger context these days, and it is able to analyze folders. It's able to analyze entire code bases and give you a pretty succinct example of like, okay, this was referenced like 15 times. That's probably a high priority thing in this code base. The next thing here that we're going to talk about is what kind of benefits you get out of this. Now, I've already talked a little bit about them as we're going, but I'll give some examples, right? Sharper focus. If you can identify the 20% that matters, you can impact the most important parts. So I just talked about that in the team insights, right? If you could find that 20%, it's going to make you more valuable. It's going to make you get to that next level. So you can't avoid the other parts of the app. I want to be clear there. Like you can't always be working on the top 20%, but you want to skew towards it and you want to go out of your way to find it. You're going to have an easier time talking to your superiors, talking to project managers, if you know what parts of the app are most important, right? Like if you know that, hey, this function right here is referenced by almost all other parts of the app. When you're in a project planning meeting and people are talking about something related to that function, you're going to know that they're talking about something super, super important. So you can raise your concerns. You can give your advice about that critical part of the application, right? And this will work outside of applications. It'll work in just regular productivity stuff. As long as you know what's important, it's going to make you more valuable in those meetings where you're trying to establish that you're a relevant person in this conversation. Like in a sales meeting, it's the same thing. Like if you know what's most important to your client, then you're going to obviously talk about what's most important to your client and not talk about the other 80%. Not relevant for web developers, but I just want to point out that this kind of thinking and this strategy moving forward can be applied to pretty much any parts of a job or any job out there. The other part is stress reduction. So I talked about how 80% of code is probably not worth refactoring. Knowing that will keep you from thinking about it, right? Like a lot of times, even for myself included, I'll write some code. It won't be the best. It'll work. And then it'll go into production and I'll start like it'll be frustrating for me. But accepting that it's not part of that 20%, it's not the most important part of your code, will allow you to move on and focus more again on the most important part. Now, if some of the top priority things need to be refactored, obviously you're prioritizing them, right? The other part is, again, in those planning meetings, if you know that, this part of the code lies in the 80% that doesn't need to be refactored, it'll avoid you from having to bike shed about it, right? Like having to have this massive conversation about something that doesn't even matter. And you can bring that up and be like, hey, this is how I found out this doesn't matter. I don't think we should spend time talking about it. Like everyone hates wasting time in meetings. This allows you to kind of promote not wasting time and be like, hey, we don't need to waste time on this. We don't need to spend an hour and a half talking about it because we don't even need to refactor it. It works right now. 2 of our users use it. Here's the analytics. 2 people have used it. Why are we talking about this for an hour and a half?
It's one of those things where it just goes back to that cliche, but very, very true statement of like time is money. And you don't want to be sitting there like talking about, the worries of like, should we have AI tools, blah, 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 blah. But then you have analytics that state clearly, hey, our demographic does not like AI tools. And you're just sitting there talking for weeks on end at each of your check-ins and things like that, talking about, we need AI tools because everyone else is doing it. Well, maybe you're in the niche that AI tools are going to be looked down upon. Maybe it'll actually hurt you. It'll hurt you with the time that you're spending on it. And if you actually invest in it, you put the AI tool in it, now we have an issue because it's in the product. Now it's like, not only is this technical debt, we now have like actual skin in the game. Are we now going to try and find a new demographic that likes this stuff? Are we going to lose some of our demographic? Like some of that stuff where I think you call it bike shedding. I've never actually heard that term before, but some of that sort of like snowball of a conversation is what I'll call it. That kind of like snowball of a conversation can like really actually blow up into something that is really not good. Such as, like I said, like actually putting skin in the game where skin in the game is not needed, or where it's just like, to be honest, where it's useless.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And the bike shedding term it comes from this like really big conversation that people had about how to build a bike shed, different ways to build a bike shed. And they spend like hours and hours on this when the reality is like, who gives a crap? Like our tendency to devote a disproportionate amount of time on menial and trivial things, right? Like we do that all the freaking time. Like if you go back and look at the history of all your meetings, you're going to notice that probably, again, back to the 80-20 rule, 80% of the time was you talking about useless things. And 20% of that time was the priority. Now, this all comes down to like, it's not like malicious or in any way as well. Like no one's doing this on purpose, really. It comes down to the fact that it's really hard identifying that 20%. And if you don't go into something with a priority of identifying the 20%, it becomes even harder. So going in and knowing exactly what the priorities are and where that 20% is not a realistic expectation. But going in and thinking like, hey, I want to get to a point where I know where the priorities are for this meeting, for this feature, for whatever, for this application, will make it so that, again, you have better balance. You're not wasting 80% of your time in a meeting. Maybe, again, and waste is another very aggressive word. Some of these conversations need to happen to figure out that this is a useless conversation, right? Like, so again, you're just trying to balance it out a little bit. You're trying to make it so that you're actively trying to focus on the higher priority stuff with the knowledge that you're probably still going to talk about things that don't matter, because that's how we figure out what the high priority stuff is. That's the reality.
Yeah. If you really like think about, I mean, just like stuff that you've talked about a year ago, even if it was really important a year ago, how much of it is important today? So, I mean, like, I would agree with that. Like, don't put too much stock in analyzing whether things are super important. But again, like if you use like a productivity tool, or you use like meeting notes of any type, there's a lot of AI meeting note taker tools and things along those lines. Like if it's anything like that, or if you use anything like that and you notice like, hey, we always spend the last half of the meeting talking about new features, and we have never implemented one of the new features that have come up in this particular meeting. All the new features that we actually implement are things that are brought up in this other meeting that's about new features. It's like, okay, well, now we know that when things start becoming derailed in our, daily milestone check or whatever the heck it is that you're getting caught up with, what we'll do is we'll have like the person running the meeting be like, hey, if we really want to bring this up, please bring this up in the new, the new features meeting. We're not going to talk about that here. And again, like, just like Mike said, you wouldn't know that that's what was happening really. And you wouldn't know, especially the first time it happened, that it was useless unless it happened. You can only improve. Well, I shouldn't say you can only improve, but you usually only improve by doing things wrong. Some people are naturally talented, whatever. But the whole kind of the point is like, you make a mistake or there's a problem. There's an inefficiency in this particular case, a loss of productivity, if you will, loss of time, loss of money. You identify that and you fix it. It's kind of one of those things where, it goes back to the idea of, and I actually really hate this, is when people assume you're just going to be good at something. So when something like you've never done this before and you disclose that, you're like, hey man, I've never done this before. And it's like, well, why did you screw it up? It's like, because I haven't done this before. You know what I mean? So like, don't be too hard on yourself is the point. Because that's another whole road we could talk about kind of like, being trained, or what do they call that? Trial by fire. Because some training kind of programs and some like teams will do that, which I'm not really a fan of. But in this particular case, in this 80-20 rule, to bring it back to that, it's sort of just like, don't be too hard on yourself. Just sort of be like, oh, shoot, we need to adjust what that 20% means. We need to adjust what that 80% means. We're going a little off the rails. It's been a few months. We need to adjust what that 80-20 means. That it's an ongoing process. You're not going to decide what 80-20 means for your company today and then have that apply and be applicable fully, fully accurately, I guess is the best way to say it. You're not going to have that be accurate in 6 months, in a year. you are going to have to adjust, assuming your company adjusts. I mean, some industries, they just kind of stay the same. There's exceptions to every rule, but that's probably not you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like that's the whole point of this, is that just to get to that point where you're starting to adjust. That's it. The last thing I do want to talk about here is a little bit about how AI, and this is something that I'm kind of battling with, and I'm curious actually from the audience how you are going to perceive this, whether this throws a wrench or actually proves the rule. Okay, so my thought here is that the typical standard situation is that building the first 80% is going to take up the same amount of time as building the last 20%, right? Like the last 20% is going to take up 80% amount of the time, as and the first 80% is going to take up 20%, whatever. Like it's going to take about the same amount of time. What AI kind of changes, in my opinion, but keeps the same, is I think the first 80% is going to become even faster than before, but the last 20%, productionizing an application, fixing bugs, is almost going to become exponentially slower. And my explanation there is that I've screwed around with AI quite a bit now. If you're using AI, especially in a vibe coding way, to build an entire platform, it can get there. Like it can get to a really cool demo or a really cool baseline of whatever you're trying to do. But as soon as you try to change things in place after your first initial couple prompts, it becomes very challenging for the AI to keep everything that you have in context. It becomes really challenging for the AI to make little intricate changes without affecting other parts of the application that you don't want it to affect, like side effects. And so it becomes this thing where you probably have to start getting into the code yourself at that point. But now you're going in almost blind because you didn't write any of this code. And so it's just going to take so much longer for you to ramp up in it to fix that 20%. That, again, and this is where I'm battling. Like, is this approving of the rule where now, like, maybe it'll be 95 and 5%. So the first 95% is going to be really quick. And the last 5% is going to take the same amount of time as the first 95%. Like maybe it shifts it a little bit. That's where like the rule maybe breaks for me. But either way, like it's just an interesting thought that I had where like, I think AI does have a pretty big impact here. And in the current time, I want to say, if you're listening to this 5-10 years down the line, this might not be the case because AI is progressing at a different pace than we've ever seen before. So you might be at a point where AI is like, it's handling that 20% just fine. But right now, it has trouble finishing a thought, like finishing a full application. And it really does take a developer to come in and finish that for them. And that isn't super trivial.
Yeah, AI, I mean, just to kind of like comment on that, AI does really get stuck. Like I've noticed so many times where I will take the result that it gives me. Like, let's say I'm trying to get a certain image or a certain graph or something made. And it just gets stuck. It can't fix whatever's broken. I will, using the exact same AI tool, take that graph, take that information that it's given me, and start a new conversation with that information that was given to me in that first conversation. And in that new conversation, it can fix that problem. But yet it was 3-4 prompts of me trying to fix the old data, and it just couldn't do it. It gets all like tied up in the context or tied up in something, and it just cannot do that. So hopefully in the future, that's not a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with that, that's kind of like the overview on how I feel about the 80-20 rule. I think there's a lot of different use cases of the 80-20 rule. There's a lot of different variations of it, but the main point that I'm trying to make is if you find that split, if you find what's the high priority, what's the lower priority, it's going to make your life easier.
100%. Yeah. And it's a way to look at a to-do list more than just like task, ticket. Obviously there's severities and things like that, but those severities are, kind of calculated or maybe should be calculated by something like the 80-20 rule. So kind of some interesting insights for developers, but also anyone who's kind of in the productivity niche, really. For that matter, or just want to be productive, I guess, which is, all of us really at the end of the day. But I think that concludes this episode. If you're interested in supporting episodes like this, remember that we are on Patreon. That's patreon.com/HTML, all the things. Check out the tiers. Give that a go. Many thanks to our $3 tier patrons. Tim from the Web Hacker on thewebhacker.com. Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com. Garrett Segal, Level Up Financial Planning via www.levelupfinancialplanning.com. Magnus from YesWeb via yesweb.se, Syntaxify from the HTML All the Things Discord server, and Stacy Mosteller from the website swoonworthydesigns.com. And remember that you can also get up to 20% off a Scrimba plan if you want to go and sign up for their premium tier. You can do so with our link, scrimba.com/links/HTML all the things. That is an affiliate link, so we will get a kickback for it. But it allows you to learn with their interactive media player code editor, and they now have full stack courses. You can learn some front end, learn some back end, maybe even land a job sometime in the near future with all of that training. And we'd also like to give a shout out to Michael LaRocca, a contributing author on HTMLallthethings.com. Michael is the author of Self-Taught, the X Generation blog at selftaughttxg.com. Feel free to leave a comment or review in the platform that you were listening to this on, and this outro will sign us off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.